This is a centurion. This is not his first execution. You don't get to be a centurion unless you have been an experienced soldier. Most likely because these soldiers were in Judea, they likewise were experienced soldiers because they needed those to help put down the uprisings that were so frequent in this area of the world. These men had overseen the flogging of so many, and yet when they flogged Christ, when they mocked him, his eyes looked back, not with hatred, but with infinite compassion. In the book of 1 Peter, the disciple Peter, looking back in chapter 2, verse 23, said, Jesus was reviled, but he did not revile in return. And when he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. When we suffer, when we are wronged, we want justice in our heart. We want that to be answered, and yet Jesus did not revile in return. With every slap, with every scourge, with every mockery, the meekness and the gentleness of his countenance shone forth. Surely the soldiers would have said, we've never seen a man suffer like this, with such gentleness and kindness. If you can imagine that Jesus was crucified at 9 o'clock, at noon a deep darkness descended, the wrath of God descended, not on the soldiers who deserved it, not on Annas and Caiaphas or any of the people that mocked Christ, but that deep darkness, the wrath of God, descended upon Jesus at noon until 3 o'clock, and at 3 o'clock he dies. And in the middle of that soul-writhing anguish, with the full fire intensity of infinite hell being poured out on the Son, in the middle of that suffering, Jesus does something according to John 19. Before I tell you what that is, I want to state that when I'm suffering, because I'm human and I'm sure that you are very similar, maybe some of you are more mature in this way, when I'm suffering, I only think about myself. Think about my hurts and my pains and why people should pity. Why? Because that's our flesh. We think about us. We often don't think about others in the middle of our suffering. But I want you to notice what Jesus did. He's hanging there under the full wrath of God. And that group of women, he sees his mother. John 19 tells us. And he sees his disciple John. And in the middle of his suffering, he is so concerned for his mother's well-being that he stops. He tells Mary, "Woman, behold your son." And he tells John, "Behold your mother." In other words, John, will you take care of Mary? I want to make sure she's taken care of. That in the midst of enduring hell, that he had the strength and the presence of mind and the control of his faculties and emotions, that he had still so much compassion overflowing from his being that he stopped to care for his mom. What do you think that the soldiers did? They look and see and they hear this compassion. And then they hear Jesus look down on them and the rest of those who are mocking him, and he says, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." Never had they seen such gentleness in such suffering. Because this Jesus didn't fight for his freedom. When he was given an opportunity to defend himself, he didn't. He didn't cry out for release. He didn't cry out for mercy like hundreds and even thousands of others had done before him. He seemed to be there for a purpose and for a reason. He hung there in power and strength, and it says that at the end, he then said what? It is finished. Something was finished. And then when it was finished, he still had the strength, after enduring hell, to push himself up on the nails and say, "Father, into my hands I commit my spirit." he gave up his spirit. It wasn't taken from him. The cross and the crucifixion and the scourging and the exposure to the elements did not take away the life of Christ. They saw him hang there, cry, "It is finished." And when it was finished, he chose his moment of death. He gave it up. In control until the end. Never had these men see someone die like this.